Education in Sri Lanka. The term education is derived out of the Latin word educare, which literally means to bring up. It is also connected to the verb form educare, meaning bring forth. According to I. Robertson, the sociologist, in its broader sense, education is almost synonymous with socialization, since both involve in passing on of culture from one person or group to another. Even the classical sociologist Durkheim's definition of education, that it is the socialization of the younger generation. Now this is very close to the above explanation. The above factors show that for the survival of society, education plays a vital role in handing down knowledge, wisdom and culture from one generation to another. In Sri Lanka, society traditionally functioned in an agricultural feudal setup, with the caste system as its base. In this system, each caste was entrusted with a job of work for the survival of the caste and for the wider community. For example, the Goigama caste became involved in paddy cultivation, while the Kumbal caste made pots for their caste trade. In this social structure, cultural transmission occurred in the context of each caste. The elders of the caste handed down the knowledge, skills and values of the caste from one generation to another. This was done in a non-formal way of education. In this type of education, the theories and the real situation was not separated. The younger members of the generation learnt the theories while getting involved in the trade of the caste that they belonged to. In this traditional society, the people who could and should read and write were the Buddhist monks or other clergy, and the members of the so-called high caste or the ruling class. In the above type of education, whether it was ruling class or working class, everybody made their contribution in society and had a source of income for their living. It was not necessary for anyone in the community to be unemployed. At the same time, in this feudal setup, all had their lands, which were handed down from one generation to another. The colonial powers began to flow into Sri Lanka in the background of the Western Renaissance. In 1505, when the Portuguese landed in Sri Lanka, it was the height of Renaissance in the West. With the Western Renaissance, Western feudalism was challenged. Peasants of the feudal system used slogans such as, "When Adam dug, Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" These changes enhanced the melting process of the Western feudalism. Yet the Portuguese system of education in the 16th century did not change much the Sri Lankan feudal education within the caste system. The main reason behind this was that in the context of the Renaissance, when the Western Church became divided and formed the Reformed denominations, the Portuguese took the side of the traditional church, which was centered around Rome. Yet the Portuguese became the pioneers in introducing systematic education to all those who wanted to study, irrespective of their caste affiliation. The process of drastic change in the field of education really began with the introduction of the Dutch Reformed Church in the context of the colonial Dutch government. The Dutch Reformed Church was fully committed to mass education, which sprang up alongside industrialization. For the first time, through this particular church, mass education was introduced to Sri Lanka. The Dutch Reformed Church saw these schools as the nucleus of their future church. This form of mass education had its maturity with the British colonial government in the 19th century. Following the footsteps of their colonial predecessors, the Portuguese and the Dutch, the British also used Christian missionary societies such as CMS and the Methodist Missionary Society to introduce the education in Sri Lanka. This can be traced as the origin of the present system of mass education in Sri Lanka. The introduction of mass education overlooked some important factors in Sri Lankan society. In the West, mass education became a necessity due to the Industrial Revolution, in which the small-scale and cottage industries were replaced by big factories in the urban areas with the introduction of big machineries. This gave rise to the mass production of goods in society. This background demanded a large body of people such as engineers, technicians, planners, buyers of raw material and sellers of finished goods in society. Mass education came up as a response to meet this need in the Western society as it faced the Industrial Revolution. Yet in Sri Lanka, mass education was introduced without a clear Industrial Revolution or without a clear demand for it. But the introduction of mass education to Sri Lanka had two clear objectives. First of all, Christian missionaries used education to spread Christianity through schools by teaching the students the Bible and the Christian doctrines and values. For example, Bible was used to teach English, and the 10 Commandments were taught to students as a guideline of daily living. The second objective was to train personnel to maintain the British colony. With the introduction of the trade economy by the British, there was a demand for administrative and clerical personnel in Sri Lanka. This need increased with the export of tea and rubber from Sri Lanka. To meet this need, the British colonial government supported the Christian missionaries to manage all these schools. At the same time, the British made use of the missionary education to create social integration in order to have a homogeneous society. Here it is clear that behind the education introduced by the British to Sri Lanka, there were two clear religious and economic objectives to further the goal of smooth and a profitable colony in Sri Lanka. Against the above background and the former non-formal education based on the caste system was shaken, education became job-oriented in the colony in order to fulfill the colonial needs. When students from different castes underwent this education, they were up to a certain extent isolated from their caste and trade that they belonged to. This isolation raised a number of issues in society. Some members of the different castes were able to come out of their caste structure and their trade and do a job of work that was not associated with their caste. This was a drastic change that became possible with mass education through missionary schools. In the former feudal system, it was not at all possible for a person to come out of the caste to which that person had belonged from birth. As in the non-formal education in the caste system, all that they learned in the schools were not used in their future employment. Even a job after studies was not assured in this system of education. At the same time, people who underwent this sort of education became attracted to so-called white-collar jobs in which they did not do hard physical work. In this manner, this Christian missionary education not only shook the caste system, but the whole social structure, which was based on the caste system. Since these schools emerged in the Protestant background, they were able to promote a middle-class mentality and the values of capitalism in Sri Lankan society. In creating this middle-class mentality, teacher attitude played a vital role. Regarding this teacher attitude, sociologist I. Robertson has observed, I quote, "Most teachers have middle-class values and attitudes and may become biased against students who fail to display them. Teachers tend to appreciate students who are punctual, clean, moral, neat, hardworking, obedient, and ambitious. Pupils who do not behave according to middle-class norms risk being considered bad students, regardless of their intelligence and ability." I unquote. Why capitalism is concerned, one of its main values, competition, is an essential part of this system of education. Through competition, the students are trained to effectively enter into the capitalistic economic structure. Even inside the school, through competition, losers are gradually eliminated from the system. Therefore, this main value of capitalism gets absorbed into the value system of students throughout their career in school. In this regard, it is clear that in its existence in Sri Lanka, the Christian community has played a vital role in the field of education by changing and reshaping the behavior of society through the effects of education in society. Thank you very much.